on Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1. Streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
You are listening to The Jan Price Show, and today my guest is director-producer V. Scott Balcerek, and we're talking about his brand new documentary called Satan and Adam. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Hi, how are you guys doing?
Great, thanks. How are you today?
Good.
Good. This is really an interesting story about Satan and Adam. Just so the audience has an idea, can you give us a little bit of the background of this documentary and of this relationship?
Well, these guys played on the street in Harlem in the mid-'80s, when Harlem wasn't sort of a place where many, at least white people went. And so Adam, who was a sort of, Columbia graduate, Ivy League kind of guy, also a harmonica player, was passing through Harlem on his way teaching a class. He was a sort of a tutor, and sees this guy playing on the street, and sort of gets enough passion in him to actually approach him. And it was a magical moment when they played together, because Sterling McGee, aka Satan, he never let anyone play with him. And it was a bad neighborhood. It was something where it was like that was his turf, and Adam was maybe perceived by some as encroaching upon it. And so what he did was they had this magical moment where they just jammed together. Satan allows it to happen. I don't know why, because he had turned away a lot of people in the past, and it just that was like 1986, and they stayed together for 30 some years after that. So
absolutely amazing. It really is amazing how they did get started. And so during the time when they got together in 1986, that there were a lot of racial tensions going on, particularly in Harlem. I moved to New York City in 1987, so I'm very well aware of what was going on during that time period. Talk a little bit about that and how their playing together may have helped ease some of those tensions, perhaps, do you think?
Yeah, they did. It's funny. They ended up becoming sort of a cultural symbol, at least in that neighborhood. And then later, when they started playing worldwide, they continued that being sort of a cultural a symbol of sort of peace and unity amongst the races, as it were. But when I was starting the documentary, I kind of felt like, well, they were just playing in Harlem. Were they really that well known outside of that area? And really, what kind of impact did they have? But when I interviewed the Reverend Al Sharpton, who of course was at the center of all of that,
yes,
he totally knew who they were. He totally knew who they were, and he could speak on it. And I was like, wow, they did have an impact that even me as a filmmaker starting out didn't really realize. Now, of course, it was just in Harlem, but you live there, and you know what I'm talking about. It does, seeing that in amidst all this racial strife, I think it sends a powerful message. Albeit that it's there's just two guys on a street corner, but I think that it did send a powerful message, and that was backed up by Al Sharpton, Reverend Al Sharpton, knowing who they were.
Yeah, and that's because he was very front and center. Reverend Al Sharpton was very front and center during that time period in New York City, up in Harlem. So, very interesting that he did. But I think a lot of people did know him. Tell us. I mean, I thought the U2 story was very fascinating. You want to talk a little bit about that?
That was another interesting thing is when I was able to get the Edge to be in the film. That came with a little bit of a caveat, because I was wondering, like, does he even remember this? I mean, of course they're in the film, but he remembered every moment about that, which I think, and the things he echoed, the things that are echoed in the movie, he also had mentioned, where that the whole crew didn't really want to go to Harlem. They were sort of freaked out by it, just like Adam might have been, or other people might have been, about entering that neighborhood at that time.
Definitely.
But they went anyway, and he was so impressed by their symbol, the symbol of what they who they were, and I felt like he put them on the album as well, which was crazy, because no one's ever been on a U2 album outside of just of course just U2, and he talks about it as a prescient moment, because the film Rattle and Hum sort of addressed some of those American themes of blues affecting rock and all other forms of music, jazz and what have you, and so just getting him involved and for him to remember that event of them walking up to Satan and Adam, and it being important enough to him in his mind for them to not only put it in the movie, their documentary, Rattle Home, but also on an album, on their album, was just remarkable to me. And he remembered, again, just like Al Sharpton, he remembered every moment of that.
It really, truly. Go ahead.
Well, it was just super impressive to me that he would, remember every moment, and what it meant to him and what it meant to the band. And that's just really special for me because these guys are huge rock stars,
right?
And so you would think that it didn't have an impact on them, but it really did. So.
And why do you think they did have Adam and Satan on their album? Because they've never allowed anybody else to be on any of their albums. So why do you think, what was it about Adam and Satan that made them want to have them included in their album?
I think what, Rattle Home about is discovering American music. He had told me that, U2, they were kind of punk musicians at the time, and they did not want to be equated with what a lot of British artists were doing at the time. For instance, they were playing Rolling Stones, for example. They were basically playing American blues music and just sort of doing it in their own way. They didn't really want to do that, but they came to discover that the blues music in New York, blues music in the United States did have an impact on them. And that album was sort of a discovery, a rediscovery of that music, which they had sort of shunned. You know what I mean? When they were starting out, they're kind of more attached to the punk movement at first, but they came to realize that you can't get away from this music because it's really the basis of so much of our culture, and it all started in America. And I think that Satan and Adam were sort of almost like an allegory to them. They're representative of this black-white mixture that creates this amazing music that came, only out of America.
It truly does. It really does. Talk a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about Satan and his background, so the audience knows a little bit about him and what his real name is, and they're probably familiar with him, I'm sure.
His real name is Sterling McGee. He started out playing. He basically was a sort of a touring musician. He played with King Curtis, Marvin Gaye, James Brown, Etta James, and that's just a few. There are others, but those are sort of like the highlights, as it were. He also he did have his own short career. He had a few songs that he recorded for Ray Charles's label, which was called Tangerine, and never quite broke out, but he did have a few regional hits. And so that was his background. But I think after that whole stint of just being a session, a side musician, a side man, basically, and then coming into the 70s, his wife sort of tragically passed, and he sort of changed his whole persona into this Satan character who played on the street only for people in his neighborhood who he kind of ministered to, in a sense. He sort of became the preacher of Harlem, the music man, the one who supplied them with change. He'd give away his change to them, and he sort of became this almost like a minister of the streets. His whole story told through music, and he had sort of a message in the music, and I think that's what he wanted to do. He never, after that period of the 60s, he never really sought out to re-enter the music business like we know people to do.
So he was just happy doing what he was doing on the street and helping others. I think that's truly amazing.
Yes, it was to me. That was one of the big things when I discovered that. I was like, wow, this is outside of just music. This is more than music. There's something else here, and that's what kind of kept me going on the movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely more of a spiritual experience in many ways. How did you get involved in this, Scott? Because this took, almost 23 years or more of your life to put this together. That's quite a passion project. So tell us about how you got involved and why you stayed involved for so long.
Well, I I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I think it was like 91-ish. I think it was 91 or 92, somewhere in there. I'm a musician. Okay, first of all, I'm a musician. I have a lot of musician friends living in Pittsburgh, and a friend of mine was like, "Hey, you got to see this band." And he was like, "They're great," and I didn't want to go out, but he sort of said, "Hey, you really got to come out and see these guys. They're amazing." You know what I mean? And so I begrudgingly went. It was a cold night, I remember, and I begrudgingly went. And I'm walking into the bar, and I hear this sound that's like a band. You know what I mean? But then you turn the corner, and it's just two people. So I was immediately blown away by their sound, that they could create that much sound. Just these two people. And Sterling, as a musician, he was just off the charts. His abilities on guitar and the fact that he was playing what in essence is drums and singing, and it was super funky. It wasn't your straight up, blues type riff that we all know. It was kind of like a funk version of it, and it was almost ethereal. Adam's harp sort of floated on top, and he would sort of hit these jazz notes, and then he would dip into some sort of more funky style playing. Anyways, I was just blown away, but that was the musician side of me that was blown away. But the other part was just them. They I remember thinking, it was sort of pithy, but I was thinking that they were sort of an allegory. This is an allegorical story of American music. The sort of old blues artist met by the younger white apprentice to him, and that they would go on and create what eventually becomes a very American sound that has basically influenced the world. And I saw them as sort of an allegory for that type of story. And does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. Yeah, very, very much so. If you are just tuning in, you are listening to the Jan Price Show, all about movies. And my guest today is V. Scott Balcerek, and we're talking about his new documentary, Satan and Adam, and it is a fascinating documentary. So at what point did you decide that you were going to start filming this?
So after I saw them, it's ironic, at the time I was editing a film for a friend of mine, Craig McTurk, who's actually the co-producer on Satan and Adam, and it was his thesis film for Cal Arts, and it was about a street singer in Pittsburgh who basically he's blind black street singer who sort of sung for his livelihood, and that film ended up winning the Student Academy Award in 93. And I remember talking to Craig, and I was like, we should. They were street musicians. Satan and Adam were street musicians, and we just, you just won this Academy Award for your film that I helped you edit. Let's see if we can get some money for the Satan and Adam film. So we tried, and we didn't get any money. we did. It took us a while, but we got a small amount of grant money, and that's how we started shooting. And then the rest was a long journey of heartbreak, and then finding money, and then not having any money, and then Sterling disappearing, and all this stuff happened. But
so what did happen to Sterling? Because Sterling did disappear. How long did he disappear for?
Well, for me, he disappeared around 97, 98 area, and I had started shooting in 1995. That's when I got the first grant money to start going on this. And then, so if you look at it from my point of view, most docs take an average, they say 3 to 4 years on average, but I mean, they could take much longer or shorter. Some docs are done in a year's period, but they always say it's a 3 to 4 year process all in it. So basically I wasn't even at my 3 year process, and he was gone. So I didn't even know, what was going on. But yeah, it was around 90, 97-ish, 98-ish.
And where did he go? And for how long did he go?
He he was living in Virginia for a moment, but we were still in contact with him. But then when he disappeared, it was Florida. He went to he has family in the Tampa region, St. Petersburg. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, what made him decide to disappear? What was the cause of that?
Well, he says that it was a nervous breakdown, but and it's in the film. He was nearing 60 at that time, I think. Yeah, nearing 60 at that time. And I feel the way that they toured was just rough on him. He they moved out of Harlem, partly because there was a lot of gentrification going on. He had a bad landlord, and things just got expensive, I think. And he moved with his wife, Miss Macy, to Virginia. And that meant that he had to travel a lot to the gigs and travel farther. And as Adam says in the film, there was times when he was just sort of stay in his car and sleep in his car, and I think it just wore him out. I mean, the life on the road is really tough, and I think it all became just too much for him. But when he disappeared, he literally disappeared. I mean, no one could find him, and I think that having a nervous breakdown, I think that his family had intervened and probably wanted to get him back in their world and maybe help him to sort of heal from all of that. Mm-hmm. is my thought. I'm not quite sure all of it, but that's kind of how it went down from his point of view, at least. But I'm sure there was more involved that I don't know about.
So when that happened, did you think, well, okay, this film's over, we're not going to be able to do any more with this movie at that stage?
Yeah, I did. I was distraught because I was like, well, maybe I'll just turn it into a short film. Or I didn't really know what I was going to do. I was kind of stunned in a sense because it was my first film, as a director. Because I'm basically a film editor. You know what I mean, from the past. So this is like my first film as a director, and I was really saddened by the whole thing. But I thought it was going to just be a short film, and I would just let off. But I couldn't, for some reason, I just couldn't let it go, and so I went out on a sort of path to find him, and I did.
And how was this for Adam during this time period?
Well, Adam was going sort of through his own strife. I mean, in the film, I think life on the road was tough for him as well. He actually ended up having a heart attack around that time.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, it's like he was young. He's young, and he had, and I think it goes to show you that there's just a lot of things that weren't right in both of their lives, and it just, it just all added up to these two events. So for me as a filmmaker, I'm like, what? I saw the film as them, this sort of salt and pepper act, and rising off the streets of Harlem into international acclaim, and it was all a sort of a deeper version of a VH1 behind the music, you know what I'm saying? Uh-huh, and yes. Instead it completely turned into, one guy disappears and the other guy sort of, has a mild heart attack.
And then how did they get back together again?
Well, I think I was a sort of a catalyst in that area. And another guy, Kevin Moore, who Sterling eventually went to a nursing home, had to go to a nursing home. His health sort of went downhill a little bit. And there was a guy there who was the activities director named Kevin Moore. And he kind of sparked to Sterling, and he definitely helped him regain the ability to play guitar. And then, but before that, I actually went out and did a search on Google to try to find Sterling McGee, and I reached out to, I found a bunch of phone numbers in Mississippi because I knew he was from Mississippi with the last name McGee. And you could do that on Google. You can only do that starting around like 98 or 99. And so I cold called a bunch of McGee's and was hung up on, and people were like, don't call here again. And finally I found like a cousin of Sterling, and he was like, oh, he's in Florida. And so I went to Florida, and just to see, like, am I going to end this movie, or am I going to see, we're going to find out if Sterling wants to continue with me. And so those two things, basically, me discovering him and finding him and going down there and seeing that if he wanted to continue or not, and making the film in the state that he was in, which was a yes. And then when I left, months after that, I think he was admitted to a nursing home, which is kind of like a rehabilitation center. And him meeting this Kevin Moore, who helped him sort of get out of his, I don't know what you would call it, I guess a sort of a funk, or he just was in a down period of his life, and he helped him get his guitar playing back. And he got a bunch of musicians around him that brought that thing out of Sterling that he always had, but which just sort of had been submerged a little bit by his state of mind.
You would think that, street musicians, which they were, would relish the whole idea of becoming international renowned, and they were, that they would be ecstatic by it, but instead it had a negative effect on both of them. Can you speak to that a little bit, or is that true, do you feel?
It's true in the sense that I don't think Sterling thought that. I thought in his mind he was out of the business, out of the music business. And all of a sudden, this guy Adam comes in and says, "Hey, let's do this. I mean, people want to hear us. They all think you're great, and that we're great." And so Sterling makes a decision to do it again, but it came at a cost. It's interesting in the film. He makes that decision because he definitely has formed a tight relationship with Adam, and he doesn't want to let Adam down. It was almost like a father figure to Adam in some ways. So he was like, "I know you. You're young, and I know you want this, and I want it for you." He wanted it for himself too, because now Sterling isn't just the side man; he's the main attraction. And so there was a little bit of that too, but it did come at a cost, because any band can tell you when you tour and you go through the rigors of being signed and cutting records and playing out for your living. It's exhausting. It's exhausting. I mean, it's exhausting making a film as well, but I would say that being in a band at that time, at least, is probably much more. Well, we all know this. We've heard this a million times. Any act performing is like when they go out on the road, it's rough, But Satan was an older man, and so I think that the question you ask is that why did that fame kind of like ruin them? And I think that there's this double-edged sword, and I think that you could say that for almost anything.
This is true. So when you've premiered this movie in many different film festivals, and you've won quite a few awards. That's really exciting.
Yes, it is.
The American Film Festival Audience Award winner, Ojai Film Festival Audience Award winner, Nashville Grand Jury Prize, Barbados Best Festival Documentary Award. Those are really amazing, and you've been in many, many film festivals. So how has the reaction been along the way? Have you gone to all of the film festivals with the film and seen the reaction? How has it been?
Yeah, I've been to most all of them, not all of them, but the reactions are incredible. They kind of blow me away a little bit, because it's just like anything. It's like when it's your baby, you kind of lose sight of what you have, but the film just resonates with people, and always packed, and in some sense, sometimes there's actually people around the waiting for tickets and stuff like that, and they can't get in.
Great. That's great. Where can people see the film Satan and Adam, Scott?
We are just about to launch a theatrical release, which I'm very proud that we were able to do.
Very good.
And that's it'll premiere in New York on April 12th. I'm looking at the dates here, at the Village East Theater in New York, and we're playing at in Harlem on April 13th at the Maisley Cinema, which is a sort of world-renowned cinema in our cinema in Harlem. So I'll be going to Harlem on April 13th, which is my birthday.
Very good. Happy birthday.
So, thank you. And so, it's and then we're doing LA on starting on April 19th, and then other places across the U.S. And then, there'll probably be more news after that I probably can't release right now, but yeah.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for being on the show. It's a pleasure having you here, and I wish you much success with Satan and Adam.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It's been great.
Thank you. Go to the Jan Price Show on Facebook and learn more about upcoming shows. And while you're there, like my page, but not only like it, write some comments. Let us know that you're listening, what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like to hear, what kind of shows you'd like to have us do. So also to listen to the to the Price Movie Minute movie reviews and listen to archive shows that you may have missed, go to thejanpriceShow.com.
On Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1, streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
The Ozio Theater in downtown Monterey is now open every day, showing independent and foreign films. The Ozio Theater has new concession offerings, including beer, wine, hard cider, and their homemade Lush Slush. You can now schedule private event screenings for community charity events, birthdays, anniversaries, or just a fun gathering of friends. For more information, visit the Ozio Theater online at oziotheater.com.